Welcome to the second part of our conversation with Alex Pheby. Thank you so much for staying with us. Now, I present the second part of our conversation. Some practitioner of Buddha, he's a historian, but I forgot his. I don't remember who the person is, so I'm not going to mention it. But they were saying that, well, you can look at places where Buddhism itself exists, that it's probably not really working properly. But then the guy said that, oh, actually, this guy said, well, it's a really long game. I mean, who says, who says that it's only few thousand years? The goal is that each and every single one of us do need to wake up and see from each other's eyes. So it's a long game.
It is a long game, yeah. I think that's true. I think that it's both long and quite short, because it is long in that the race is long. But like a marathon, you need to be ensuring that you're running in approximately the right direction. Otherwise, you never get to the end. I mean, you know that it's not okay for you to act like an asshole all the time. You know that. You don't have to wait to be told. It's just that somehow some people have been led to believe that it's okay for them to act badly. Because they're privileged and good, and they can do whatever they like because reality is such that it supports them. And obviously striving for nirvana and kind of universal enlightenment across multiple regenerations is clearly a long game, but at the same time it has smaller individual failures and successes to reach some kind of accommodation with the world, etc., etc. I don't know, why did we get onto politics anyway? I can't help it.
Markets, it's fine.
Markets.
I mean, we are still putting politics into a larger context, so it's interesting.
And I think politics is very much to do with your idea of what the real is, and to do with what the self is, and all of those things. It's when you start taking those things for granted, and that they are something that means something outside of your local situation, then I think you get yourself in terrible trouble, because it lets you decide what's right and wrong. And the moment you're deciding what's right and wrong in that way, you're bound to make mistakes. It's wrong for lazy people to be rewarded for their laziness. It's wrong. That's clearly wrong. You can't be rewarded for laziness. Then the trouble comes in, well, what's laziness? And then you're in a problem, because you're just finding laziness, and there's always going to be margins to that laziness. No one's pure lazy. And even the people who are pure lazy doesn't stop them doing well. There's lots of very lazy people who do really well.
This is now I think it's that's where it gets really hard, probably. I don't know, for me at this point, where it's yes, there is a there's a self-reflective subjective reality. That's where the culture is coming from. And we have this superpower in one sense, that we can separate a little bit from this deep now, and plan into the future, and just we exist somewhere in between those timelines, and then we can create these virtual realities. And then we have these mirror where we just self-reflect and distort. Although, as you are saying, we gotta still rely on each other in this crazy situation, and still gotta go towards a bit of a direction which is not leading all of us and life into some sort of a ledge, because it has happened many times on Earth itself.
Please. And in very recent memory, I mean, sometimes I become annoyed. There's an argument that the nuclear deterrent has prevented war in Europe since the Second World War, and I hear people say things like that, and then I think, well, that's true if you ignore all of the wars that have happened in Europe, particularly the Bosnian conflict. I mean, I shouldn't laugh. We're looking at a situation where on mainland Europe there have been genocides in what is supposed to be the kind of the home of the rational West, and you look at the States, and it's barbaric, the kind of oppression that Black people suffered there daily. I mean, it's just a nonsense to imagine that any of these things are good. And we are all kind of galloping cheerfully off in one direction on the assumption that everything is right. And it only takes very small things, a disease that realistically um, is only, well, what is it, 4 months old, and it's ground the entire culture to a stop. And that's not the first time this has happened. Just the Spanish flu is, the most obvious, and that's within some people's living memory. I mean, increasingly few people, but there were people who were alive in 1918, and yet none of us seem to think that that was worth bothering with. Uh, despite the fact that it's blindingly obvious that it was there, and it's effacing and overwriting the whole ecological kind of nightmare that we're all going through at the moment. But runaway overproductive capitalism is we know it's causing global warming, we know it's ruining the planet, we know, and we're doing it anyway because it seems to be the right thing to do. It's all of those things, and to say, well, we do rely on each other, but we rely on the past of us and the future of us too, and all of those things are things that we have to bear in mind. We can't, just. I mean, who even wants this crap anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, during the lockdown, I've kind of come to the conclusion that I don't really need any of those things that I seem to have thought that I might have needed. Providing the food comes in, and no one's hassling me, I'm okay, I think. And I can remember times in my life when, if I'd have tried to go through this situation in those times, I'd have been in serious trouble. I mean, there were times when you've not had money for electricity because you had an electricity meter and the key wasn't charged up and you had no cash, right? And that was the only way you could get. How does that work now? How do people with electricity keys get electricity, right? I don't understand. I mean, you would rely on so many different people in order for you just to feel roughly comfortable in this situation. And any of those things that went wrong, if our boiler broke and this was the winter, then we'd be in trouble. If the water went down, if the internet went down, I'd be absolutely, that's it. There'd be nothing, I couldn't work. They'd have to fire me or something. I don't know what they'd do. Now is the most important person in my life, whoever it is who keeps the internet running. I guess, they probably are.
No, yeah, I agree. It's an odd question, very odd, where we have separated ourselves from these natural signals, which somehow had some check on us. Like, I don't know, diseases and wars. We have kind of maybe, I don't know, maybe it was a lot of suffering. We built walls, we built cities, okay. And then we have maybe disconnected a lot from, if you want to call it, nature itself, which was providing us guidance and it's
other people. I mean, I sit and talk to the students, and we talk about stuff while we're doing, because people write about all sorts of different things in workshops. You look at other people's writing and talk about them, and often people will write about how terrible the world is and the ethics of the things that they're doing. And then we look around and we're all wearing stuff from Primark and whatever clothes you happen to have on. And everyone knows that those are made by slave children in other countries. Everybody knows that. And they know that's why it's so cheap. And they know that's why when you go to Morley's Fried Chicken, that whatever the chicken that you've eaten from Morley's Fried Chicken had a terrible life. Terrible, terrible, terrible life. And that the whole of the culture that you're very much benefiting from is predicated on suffering, right? And somehow we've managed to make it so that we don't have to think about that all the time.
Yeah.
And I think, the pandemic, the way that people are dealing with the pandemic here on the news is like, okay, this is a terrible problem for the West. And it is a terrible problem for the West, but it's going to be even worse in places where they don't have a decent medical system, because we've enforced generations of debt, famine debt on them, and are forcing them to pay back the interest payments and not invest in their own infrastructure. I mean, what is going to happen in places? Well, how are we going to deal with that? People worried that they couldn't deal with Syrian refugees. What are you going to do when the entire infrastructure of countries throughout the world is just collapsed? What are you going to do?
Yeah, that's. I mean, I just want to figure right now about my own guilt. This is made in Pakistan.
But I
And
think
this
that's
is
probably the way it works the whole time.
yeah,
I think that we've this is one of the reasons, I think, if you look at Chomsky, for example, who looks at the way the media treats the way we live our lives and forces us into an endless state of paranoid anxiety, precisely for that reason, so that we always think, I've got to look after myself, got to look after myself, got to look after me and mine first, because if I don't, then no one's going to. And forget all of those people far away. I'll deal with them once my safety has been assured. And I think that is precisely how we end up in a situation where we don't come into those checks and balances from either nature or from other people. It's because we draw in our vision so closely on the people around us and forget the suffering of everybody
yeah.
else.
There's a beautiful documentary called True Cost about
Yeah.
this textile industry and the fashion industry.
Right.
Uh, anyone interested in this topic,
Yeah, I
it's
should watch it.
amazing. Yeah, for sure.
See, I love depressing the hell out of myself. That's one,
Oh, yeah.
that's sounds. I mean, what can you do? I mean,
There's yeah.
it's a terrible
Cheers.
world.
Well, actually, there are something positives coming out of
Okay.
very scientific, like really dominantly scientific people who have authority. So there's
Mm,
this guy whose name is Jeffrey West, and the other guy, he's a astrophysicist, and the other guy is David Krakauer. They have
okay.
Institute of San Jose, and they are working on complexity science, and they are trying to break down these walls and the barriers. And one of the research they have done, beautiful, it's about this growth, this market, and
Mm,
the cities. They said cities is beautiful. I mean, it's one of the, let's say, yeah, it's a brilliant best, one of the best inventions for
mm,
humans in one sense, if you are looking at growth, and if you're looking at how you can generate a lot of power, which you can then direct towards achieving something.
yeah.
But then they have done a really good calculations, and it's fascinating, the calculation, how they have compared cities with other organisms, because cities are not like separated
Mm,
from our world itself. So our biology is based in the suns and the stars, and somehow,
sure.
and all of the calculation they have done describes that how of our age is dependent on many other calculation. But when they describe cities, it's actually one of the very unnatural calculation, and cities shows unlimited growth, and that's just
Mm,
a huge problem. And they show an unlimited growth to a point, and then there is no gradual decrease.
no,
It
just
comes to
disappear.
zero.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is,
yeah.
yeah, that's
Well, it's not that. I mean, okay. Well, you can imagine. It's. I mean, let's make an allegories in the other direction. If you start by taking a small amount of cocaine, you will eventually take an infinitely large amount of cocaine, right? In fact, that the requirement to have more and more is built in, and eventually you just have a heart attack and die. It's the same. You can pump, or a balloon. All right, never mind cocaine. It's balloons. If you pump air into a balloon, eventually it pops.
that's
If
yeah,
we're looking for all these various
that's a
metaphors.
more user friendly
Yeah, let's do
example.
that one. Cut the other one out. Or
Okay.
dream, whatever it is. Yeah, but
Yeah.
anything that it's an inflationary pattern, right? It's the
Yeah.
same with stop, busts, and booms. I mean, all of those things look like they're going to be brilliant and look like they're going to go on forever, and then the whole thing just dies. And you can see that throughout the entirety of history. We don't live in the Assyrian Empire anymore for good reason. It
Yeah.
got too
Yeah.
big and then it died.
Okay.
And then people went for smaller things,
Okay.
or
Before
the
I
Bronze Age collapse. Yeah, okay.
no, go, say it, finish it.
No, fine. I'm not going to go into the Bronze Age collapse. That
No,
would be
well, I mean, that's why I'm saying I don't think I can go any further. We have reached
yeah,
like pretty far back, but
yeah.
I do want to, before it ends, I do wanted to ask you about what is your relationship with the flow state, or whatever you call that state. I don't know whatever
I don't know what you
your
mean. The flow
okay.
state, what in terms of your practice?
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, flow state, they call it. Uh, Check Send Me High is a researcher who, when well, when you're writing without your prefrontal critical self, which
Hmm.
is completely editing, but
Right.
sometimes you just really feeling like that you are just the medium. You know
Yeah,
how
sure.
people describe it. So how's your relationship with that? How do you go in flow state and check it back? What's
Well, I
your...
mean, it's we don't call it the flow state in creative writing, but that is it's pretty solid on from our discipline, which is you need to get yourself into a state in which you're not paying attention to yourself, right? Essentially, you're just typing, and your fingers are essentially transcribing, acting as a medium for whatever it is that you're thinking about, and that comes through. The more sophisticated you get as a practitioner, the more like finished writing that seems. But essentially, you're just acting as a conduit for whatever is. Um, you can use the metaphor of the unconscious from the Freudian end, that is just bubbling up from your unconscious. You're fantasizing and you're riffing in the same way that you would do if you were composing a piece of music on the fly, and then you just let that run. And generally for me that takes place over a course of a rather limited time period, until I have sufficient words to make up the length of a book, or I reach the end of a set narrative, a kind of narrative that I was thinking of. And basically you try and be as hands off with that as possible. So I start a new document every day. I riff on whatever is the theme that I imagined I got to the end of last time, and then I let that run until I can't do it anymore. And then I do the same the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. Basically, not really thinking about it, not looking at it, not dealing with it at all, with the exception of occasionally anxiously wondering what it is that I'm doing, and trying to remember, what I was doing with these characters in these places, how I was fantasizing around their lives at the end of the last session, and then I begin the next, and then the forebrain editorial process happens on top of that. So the process of kind of communing with the muse, which is a kind of an earlier pre-Freudian way of describing it, is as free as it possibly can be. And then the rest of the material, the intellectualizing over the top of it, comes later. And then after that, there's the whole, kind of practical corporate end of getting the thing published
do you
and changing it in ways that, the reader might like.
do you think that about the 10,000 hours of that the thing about that, if you have invested somehow 10,000 hours into a craft, then it's much easier for you on the go to be go into the muse or
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to do the same thing all the time, certainly. If you try and do different things all the time, then a little bit, but not as much by any stretch of the imagination. I think 10,000 hours is a kind of very arbitrary seeming amount, and often you meet people who seem to be naturally good, and capable of doing whatever it is that they do brilliantly well. There are lots of young students who come who definitely haven't put in 10,000 hours, who have what you would otherwise have to call talent, and they're capable of producing very good material very young. I think where the craft comes into it is in flexibility as much as anything. So I think it's both a matter of being able to master the basic techniques, but also to be able to deal with things, more than one thing, and to do things in response to other people's requirements of you. So I think the better at it you get, the more likely you are to be able to say, to rewrite a manuscript on the basis of the fact that somebody required something else from it. So, change your heroine into a hero, or set it in Greece. Those kind of things. You
yeah.
can make those accommodations skillfully without making yourself feel like you've done something different. Unless you don't know what you're doing, at which point then you just have to throw your hands in the air and start something else. So yeah, I think practice definitely makes perfect, and all of these other platitudes. And you do have to put the hours in, and you do have to develop your skills and your range of behaviors. But it may be that once you've got 10,000 hours in, then subsequent hours to that aren't improving you and maybe reducing your ability, because I think sometimes there's a tendency to travel over old ground, and thereby do the same thing repeatedly, or to try to make whatever it is that you're doing sufficiently the same as the last thing that you did, so you don't have to put as much effort in, because you've become used to your craftsmanship, and you don't like it when it feels uncomfortable, which is why I think it's always good to do different stuff. because then you're still having that kind of enthusiastic engagement with the craft that you did when you were younger and that carried you through to this point, rather than just trying to grind out whatever the next thing is that someone's asked you to
Perfect. Perfect. Okay.
do.
No, I'm actually looking forward. I've read a bit of, blurb from you for the new book.
Yeah, well,
F-
one day it'll come out, so fingers crossed.
Deeply anything to do with the underground or our shadows. I am, yeah, hooked.
You're all over. Good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
What's
yeah,
your
yeah.
general area of expertise?
Oh, yeah. Well, it is to do with self,
Yeah.
conscious altering experiences.
Okay.
So yeah, real and reality, and also some sort of artificial intelligence, which is I would like to
Nice.
maybe call it transcendence intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, which is
Yeah.
just so overused at this point that everything is artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Sure.
So mostly, yeah, conscious altering experiencing, learning itself.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm personally really really interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of interesting material there. I mean, frightening, but interesting too. I mean, particularly I mean, it'd be useful for this pandemic stuff. I mean, pattern recognition and neural nets and those kind of things are, are going to become very useful, I would imagine. There's lots of interesting stuff that I was seeing recently about the ability of um, neural nets to recognize not the causes of things like cancer, but the effects in large epidemiological studies. That means that they could then work back to see who was likely to have which particular disease at any given time on the basis of their presentation, despite them not having any pathological symptoms.
Yeah.
And those kind of like very wide and very deep thought activities would seem to be ideal for non-human intelligences.
That's a new hope, which I don't know how. I haven't checked it very recently, but it's to do
Mm.
with quantum computing. They are
Yeah.
trying to well, at one point they're trying to figure out neural networks, which is
Mm.
not just predictive stats, simple
Yeah.
algorithms, but truly neural networks which can communicate with each other and then build up as a kid builds up by
Yeah.
interacting with the world and understanding in
Yeah.
the
And then coming up with
safety.
its own solutions. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you watch Devs?
Oh my God. Yes. Yes. Could you imagine that I actually started watching it just yesterday and finished 3 episodes? I'm going to binge watch it tonight.
It's nicely done. I mean, I
It's
don't
good.
agree with its position on determinism,
Same.
but I won't tell you what happens at the end.
Oh,
So,
please don't. Please don't. Yeah. No, I
right.
don't. I don't. I think he has talked, he has looked into string theory and he has looked into quantum physics, but not
Yeah.
enough,
Yeah.
because
Sure.
what he is talking about, there are some other physicists whose theories are really well known, would tell you
Yeah.
about quantum physics, wave function,
Oh,
and
yeah, definitely.
some of the
I
things
mean,
which, yeah,
the more specific his mouthpiece characters are on the science, the less convincing the whole thing becomes. If they just keep their gobs shut about it, then you could imagine your own physics into it, because some of it is kind of it's it's the kind of stuff that you'd have talked about when you're at school, and with your mates. Oh, imagine if type stuff. But it's still entertainingly done, and it's nice to see that guy at the
it's,
Parks and Recreation, like widening his his
yeah.
uh,
Yeah,
choice of role.
he's a different type of director, to be honest. He's really
Yeah.
engaged in philosophy and science, and has a lot of subtext.
And it's hard. I mean, you want to be like popular, and you want people to be able to understand what you're saying, so you can't do it too complicatedly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I do
I don't
think that
know.
his, yes, please.
Tell me what you think of the end when eventually you've watched
Oh
it.
yeah, yeah, for sure, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks a
Okay.
lot,
Cool.
Alex. Yeah, it was
You're
great. Thank
welcome.
you. Yeah, yeah.
All right
I
then.
would love to do something in the studio,
Yeah, that'd be
sometime when
good.
we are out of this.
If they ever allow us back into the campus, I
Hopefully.
guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All
See you
right.
later.
See you
Yeah.
soon. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Bye.